Good afternoon, grade 12 learners. I am Johannes Tumani from Ikaelelo Secondary School. It's life science, and we are going to discuss with you the menstrual cycle. Before we discuss the menstrual cycle, let us look at our examination guidelines, which tell us what is it that we need to do or to know in the, from this topic, menstrual cycle. Firstly, we need to state, to be able to state the menstrual cycle. That includes the uterine cycle and the ovarian cycle. Secondly, we need to know, to describe the following events in the ovarian cycle: the development of the Graafian follicle, the process of ovulation, the formation of the corpus luteum. And we also need to describe or be able to describe the following events in the uterine cycle, which is also part of the menstrual cycle: the changes that takes place in the thickening or thickness of the endometrium, and as well as the menstruation. The fourth point is that we need to know or be able to describe the hormonal control of the menstrual cycle. That includes the following hormones: the FSH, secreted by the pituitary gland; the estrogen, secreted by the Graafian follicle; the LH, also secreted by the pituitary gland; and the progesterone. The last point is that we need to be able to describe the negative feedback mechanism involving the FSH, the progesterone, and the progesterone in controlling the production of the ova. Right, now we can now go to our presentation on ovarian cycle and the hormonal function, control. The hormonal menstrual cycle refers to the series of changes in the female's ovary and the uterus over a period of 28 days. There are two separate cycles that make up, like I said, that make up the ovarian cycle, and these cycles are the menstrual cycle, sorry. And these cycles are the ovarian cycle as well as the uterine cycle. The ovarian cycle. During the ovarian cycle, the pituitary gland or the hypophysis is secrete the hormone called the FSH. And this FSH stimulates the development of the follicle into the Graafian follicle, which have the ova. The Graafian follicle produces estrogen. The Graafian follicle that has developed due to the FSH. As it develops, it produces estrogen. And the increase in estrogen, or the increase in estrogen, remember, it will also cause the decrease in the amount of FSH. But the function of the estrogen in the menstrual cycle is to stimulate the thickness or the thickening of the endometrial lining of the uterus. Around day 14, the pituitary gland secretes the hormone called LH, the luteinizing hormone, which causes the ovulation, that is the rupturing of the Graafian follicle to release an ovum. The ovum, which has been released after ovulation, it travels along the fallopian tubes to the uterus. And remember, it takes almost 7 days to travel from the ovaries to the uterus. The ruptured follicle is now converted or developed into the corpus luteum immediately after ovulation. Remember, the follicle has ruptured, and now the remains of the ruptured follicle are now converted into corpus luteum by the LH, which secrete the hormone called progesterone. And what is the function of progesterone, which is secreted by the luteinizing corpus luteum? The progesterone will now help in maintaining the thickness of the endometrium, or the lining of the endometrium, in preparation for pregnancy. If the ovum is not fertilized, the corpus luteum will degenerate and cause the decrease in the production of the progesterone. If the ovum is not fertilized, but if the ovum is fertilized, it means the progesterone will continue to be produced by the corpus luteum and maintain pregnancy. But now if the egg is not fertilized and enters the uterus, that corpus luteum that is secreting progesterone will now start to become smaller, or that means it will degenerate, become smaller and smaller and smaller. And the decrease in the size of the corpus luteum, or that degeneration of the corpus luteum, will also cause the decrease in the amount of progesterone. And remember, progesterone is the one that maintains what? It maintains the thickness of the endometrial lining. So therefore, it means, if the progesterone decreases, or the amount of progesterone decreases, what is going to happen? The endometrium lining will now start to tear off. And when it starts to tear off, what is going to happen? The blood will flow. That means the egg will be shed with blood during menstruation. The uterine cycle, which is the second cycle of the menstrual cycle. During uterine cycle, the estrogen is secreted by the Graafian follicle and will cause the endometrium to become thicker, or more thicker, and more vascular, as well as more glandular, in preparation for the attachment of the fertilized ovum and pregnancy. After ovulation, the corpus luteum will secrete progesterone to maintain the thickness of the endometria. Immediately after ovulation, the corpus luteum will then secrete the progesterone to maintain the thickness that has already been stimulated by the estrogen that has been secreted by the Graafian follicle. If the ovum is not fertilized, the lining of the endometrium or the endometrial lining will tear off. And when it tears off, what is going to happen? The unfertilized egg or ovum will be shed with blood as menstrual period, accompanied by bleeding. This takes place 14 days after ovulation and lasts for 4 to 7 days, depending on some women will take 4 to 5 days. Their men will take 4 to 5 days. Some can take even up to 7 days. Right. I said the menstrual cycle is made up of 2 cycles. That is the ovarian cycle as well as the uterine cycle. Right, this is the structure of the ovary. When we talk about the ovarian cycle, we are talking about the changes that are taking place within the ovary. When we look at this That is the follicle, primary follicle. The primary follicle will develop into secondary follicle, tertiary follicle, up until it becomes the Graafian follicle with the ovum inside. So those are the changes of follicle that are taking place from follicle to secondary follicle, from secondary follicle to tertiary follicle, from tertiary follicle up until it becomes the Graafian follicle. During this development of the follicle, the follicle becomes bigger and bigger, and when it becomes bigger and bigger, it grows. It means the amount of estrogen that is produced by the follicle is also going to increase. In the amount of estrogen is also going to increase. And when the amount of estrogen increases, it means the high amount of estrogen will cause the FSH to decrease, the amount of FSH to decrease, up until the pituitary gland will now secrete the hormone called LH. And that LH, the target organ, will also be the ovary. And then the LH will cause this Graafian follicle, the matured follicle, to rupture. And then when it ruptures, it will release the ovum. And the ovum will travel along along the fallopian tube, from the ovary along the fallopian tube into the uterus. Right? But now, if this very same ovum that has been released during ovulation is not fertilized, what is going to happen? The ruptured follicle is now going to be converted into corpus luteum by what? By LH. And the corpus luteum will grow and become bigger and bigger as it develops due to the amount of LH. But now, if the egg is not fertilized, what is going to happen with this corpus luteum? The corpus luteum will degenerate. And when it degenerates, it means the amount of progesterone that is secreted by the corpus luteum will also decrease. And when it decreases, it will cause the thickened endometrium lining to do what? To tear off. And when it tears off, what is going to happen? The blood will be shed with that unfertilized egg, and that process is the menstruation. Right? I think we are all together on that one. Right.